Hey, how's it going guys? Kris here with another Battlefield 5 weapon versus for you today. And this one's going to be focusing on two of the assault class's semi-automatic rifles. First one being an experimental Polish weapon, the KARABIN 1938M, and the second being the Gewehr 43, a really sturdy German rifle that was mainly issued to specialist soldiers and elite units in limited numbers. These two weapons both have a lot of the same sort of stats and specialization choices, with only a few minor things actually being different to separate them from being identical, from a statistical point of view anyway. And in this guide, I'm going to be running over all of those key stats, letting you know exactly how the guns compare and differ, and how that's going to affect their function in the game, nicely fitting into the assault class's semi-auto rifle category. So first of all, just how deadly are the KARABIN and the Gewehr 43? Well, this is actually one of the things that makes the two weapons play out in a very similar kind of way, as they're both going to be as dangerous as each other in terms of damage, fire rate, and essentially the time it takes to drop other players to the floor. The KARABIN 1938M and the Gewehr 43 share the same damage stats, dishing out that maximum damage of 45 up to the range of 25 meters, and it's here where the figures start to fall. As your bullet whizzes through the air, the further it travels, the less power is going to be behind it. And eventually, at the range of 75 meters, your bullets are going to inflict their minimum damage of 33.5. Despite seeming like a bit of a drop that's probably going to impact kill times, it doesn't matter whether your enemy is within point blank range or wandering around miles away. It's going to take the same number of shots to bring them down regardless, 3 bullets pretty much every time. Unless they've already taken a bit of flak first, which is where that higher damage up close just might help you out. This is a pretty decent set of figures compared to some of the other semi-auto rifles, and it also means that both guns will be capable of killing other players with 2 shots within close to mid ranges, providing one of those bullets smacks the other guy right in the head. Though anywhere beyond 50 meters, it'll typically take 3 bullets to do the trick, even with a headshot. The fire rates for both the KARABIN and the Gewehr 43 aren't exactly lightning fast, as the two guns are both going to shoot at the steady speed of 300 RPM. Not terrible, but still beaten by a fair few of the other rifles in the same category, which kinda balances them out a bit, with them having a fairly high damage output. This also gives the two guns some pretty good effectiveness for ranged combat, but perhaps makes them a bit riskier to use up close, with that fire rate being slower and less spammable. There's going to be a bit more pressure on you to land shots within shorter sight lines, with any missed shots drastically increasing the weapon's time to kill, making you more vulnerable if you can't get those bullets on target in a heated gunfight. And because neither the KARABIN nor the Gewehr 43 have access to any fire rate boosting specializations, there isn't any way to give the guns any more of an advantage in these sort of scenarios, potentially making them both deadly over all ranges, but only if you're accurate. With accuracy playing a vital role in doing well with both the KARABIN and the Gewehr 43, it's best to know exactly how the two guns are going to perform when they're being fired, as this is going to affect their ease of use and make them more or less effective for taking on players over a wider range span. If we take a look at the recoil patterns for both the guns, they do offer some slightly different stats to each other, with the KARABIN 1938M having the lower vertical reading of 1.44, as opposed to the Gewehr 43's figure of 1.55. Roughly making the KARABIN about 7% more stable as a result. This means that it's not going to jolt upwards quite as much every time you squeeze its trigger, and so this might allow it to be more controllable and easy to use against players further away, possibly allowing you to fire at the gun's maximum rate of 300 RPM more effectively, without having to pace your shots out quite as much. It's not a massive difference, and it's not really going to affect anything within closer to medium ranges where that higher vertical kick will be less of a problem, as both guns should seem fairly manageable here without having to worry too much about your line of fire drifting upwards, to the point where it's going to become uncontrollable while you shoot away. But the KARABIN does generally have the advantage here regarding its recoil pattern nevertheless, and so it might often feel like you can stay on target easier while spamming your shots and firing quickly, especially when you're taking on enemies in the distance. Horizontal recoil for both weapons is set to a flat value of 0, basically giving the two guns 0 left or rightwards movement per shot fired. So just like with the other semi-automatic rifles, they're both going to be very accurate, and aren't going to be affected by any sort of horizontal sway, making life a little bit easier. But while we're on the topic of recoil, it's key to know that both weapons have access to the recoil buffer specialization, allowing you to reduce that upwards kick even further, to make them even more stable. and this can technically make the Gewehr 43 more controllable than the KARABIN, depending on those spec choices. Though the KARABIN is still going to be superior at the end of the day, with it also having access to that recoil buffer as well, giving it the best recoil pattern overall. One last thing to point out in this section that's going to affect the trajectory of those bullets is muzzle velocity, which just so happens to be the same for both guns. The KARABIN and the Gewehr 43 have a base velocity of 760 meters per second, which can be sped up and made even quicker with high velocity bullets, bumping it up to 860 meters per second. So these values are quite reasonable for allowing the guns to perform well over medium distances, though of course, high velocity bullets will probably improve their performance against ranged targets, making their bullets faster and so less leading will be required, typically going well in combination with a mid-range scope. So other than precision, there's also a few subtle differences in the ways that both weapons perform under pressure when reloading those rounds. And at a standard mag size, the two guns both have the same 10 shot capacity, typically allowing them to take on a few enemies per reload, depending on your aim and the amount of health said enemies have before you start firing away. Though because the Gewehr 43's got access to those detachable magazines, this will actually give you an extra 11th round to spare, possibly helping to account for a missed shot, giving it a slight advantage should you decide to equip those detachable mags. But aside from ammo capacity, reload times are actually quite different between the two guns, with the Gewehr 43 generally having the upper hand in pretty much all cases. The KARABIN can perform tactical reloads ranging between 3 to 6.37 seconds to replace 1 to 9 rounds, whereas the Gewehr can do the same slightly quicker, with its tactical reloads taking between 2.5 to 5.5 seconds. Even if you decide to equip the quick reload specialization onto the KARABIN, it's only going to put its reload times more or less on par with the standard Gewehr 43, not really giving it any kind of particular advantage in terms of reliability. Though with the Gewehr 43 having access to those detachable magazines, these are going to speed up those already decent reload times even more, reducing tacticals down to just 2.25 seconds and its empty one down to 3.15 seconds, giving the Gewehr 43 some much snappier and more consistent reloads overall. One thing to point out for both weapons is that, unlike a lot of the other guns in the game, adding on a scope won't restrict your ability to use stripper clips, so you can perform those empty reloads at the same time with or without those optical attachments. There isn't really any difference between the two guns' empty reload times, unless you get those specializations involved, which is where the Gewehr 43 is going to be superior. So generally speaking, this will probably make it seem like a much more dependable rifle as a whole, possibly making it better suited for use closer to the front line, where you'll be able to manage your ammo a bit easier when surrounded by the enemy team. So which guns should you choose? The KARABIN 1938M and the Gewehr 43 function as strong choices for mid-range combat, usually catering quite well for pretty much all ranges, depending on your aim and skill. They're both extremely similar weapons on the face of it, having most of the same specializations, and with them sharing a lot of the same basic stats too, putting them on par with each other in several different areas, like say their power output and times to kill. A few subtle stat tweaks generally don't make the rifles drastically different to each other, but there's still some notable things worth pointing out that might just sway your decision when choosing which one to pick for a certain playstyle, or to gain a specific advantage in one way over another. The KARABIN 1938M is generally going to be the gun with the bonus to precision, not because it's a more accurate weapon, but because of that lower vertical recoil, making it a bit more stable, and probably easier to control when you're firing at its maximum rate or taking on someone further away. This could potentially make it a slightly better ranged weapon, as that recoil should seem a tad more manageable when used with some mid-ranged optics, so you probably won't have to pace your shots out quite as much in order to stay on target. With that said, it can't use detachable magazines, and its reloads are generally going to take quite a while to perform, making it a fairly risky gun to use with aggressive tactics and playing closer to the objective, surrounded by danger. This is where the Gewehr 43 might seem to fit in a bit more, being able to perform more comfortably in heated situations, having the faster reload speeds and the option to use detachable magazines, making those reloads seem much nippier and more consistent. It'll be the more reliable choice for this reason, and so it might be able to handle better within closer ranges against multiple enemies, where its slightly higher recoil will pose less of a problem, allowing you to fire at that maximum rate without really having to worry about your line of fire drifting off into the sky. plus you'll be granted an extra round, should you choose to equip detachable mags, giving you a further bonus to reliability. Though generally speaking, both weapons are fully capable of dominating in the hands of a skilled player, and they both can typically perform quite well over all ranges, providing you take these minor strengths and weaknesses into account when deciding which gun to pick up. So that's pretty much it for another one, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful. Hit that like button if you did, and make sure you subscribe and click the bell to be the first to see new content coming soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next episode.